Today, we're diving deep into one of the most terrifying chapters in all of human history, the Black Death. And let me tell you, this isn't just a story about some old disease. It's about fear. It's about a society being pushed to the absolute breaking point, and a world that would never, ever be the same again.
You know, when we think of the Middle Ages, we usually picture castles and knights, all that grandeur. But lurking just beneath the surface, a catastrophe was brewing. A shadow was falling across the entire continent, and it didn't care one bit if you were a king or a peasant.
All right, so to really understand just how devastating the plague was, we have to rewind a little. We need to look at what Europe was like right before it hit. Because in a lot of ways, the whole continent was basically a tinderbox, just waiting for a single spark.
I want you to try and imagine walking through a medieval city. It's noisy, it's chaotic, and frankly, it's filthy. We're talking about narrow, packed streets where people are just tossing their waste right out the window. And you're living in incredibly close quarters, not just with other people, but with animals too. It was, unfortunately, the perfect environment for rats and their fleas to absolutely thrive.
75 million. That's roughly how many people were living in Europe at the time. The continent was just teeming with life, from farmers out in the fields to merchants in those bustling cities, and not a single one of them had any idea that a biological hurricane was about to make landfall and wipe out a massive chunk of their world.
So all of these things came together to create the perfect storm. You've got these unsanitary cities that are basically petri dishes. You've got new trade routes crisscrossing the continent, which sound great, but they also acted as superhighways for disease. And maybe the most critical piece, their medicine was completely in the dark. They believed sickness came from an imbalance of humors in the body, not from germs. They had no idea what was coming or how to fight.
And then the spark landed. In the year 1347, the plague finally arrived in Europe. And it came, as so many things did, by sea.
Just look at how fast this thing moved. It's absolutely terrifying. It lands in Sicily, and in just 2 years, it has swallowed almost all of Europe. Those very same trade routes that brought prosperity and goods to the continent were now delivering death with horrifying efficiency.
And this was the first sign that you had it. Buboes. These incredibly painful, swollen lumps were the awful signal that you were infected. From there, things got worse, fast. A raging fever, vomiting, and then internal bleeding that caused dark patches on the skin, which is how the Black Death got its chilling name.
And here's the number that really drives home the horror. In a lot of the communities that got hit, the death rate was as high as 60%. Think about that. This wasn't a disease you had a good chance of surviving. For most people, once you showed symptoms, it was a death sentence.
The terror this caused is almost impossible for us to imagine. It just shattered society. Parents would literally abandon their own sick children. Spouses would flee from each other. The basic human bonds that hold a community together just completely disintegrated in the face of this overwhelming fear.
So what do you do when you're up against an enemy you can't see, you can't fight, and you definitely can't understand? Well, this is where things descend into an inferno of fear, wild superstitions, and some truly desperate attempts to find a cure.
This right here shows you the fatal gap between what they believed and what was actually happening. On one side, you have the theories. It's a punishment from God, or maybe it's bad air, a miasma that's making everyone sick. And on the other side, you have the cold, hard science they couldn't possibly have known, a bacterium carried by fleas living on rats.
And that total lack of understanding just fueled absolute desperation. You had groups of people called flagellants marching through towns, whipping themselves to try and appease an angry god. But they were probably just spreading the disease even faster. Innocent communities were scapegoated and brutally massacred. And that famous beaked plague doctor mask, it was stuffed with herbs and flowers to block the bad air, a completely useless defense.
But, amidst all the chaos, one rational idea actually did emerge. Down in the port cities of Italy, officials started telling arriving ships they had to anchor offshore for 40 days, or 40 giorni, to prove they weren't carrying the sickness. And just like that, the idea of quarantine was born. It was one of the only things that actually worked.
So the plague didn't just pass through Europe, it burned through it, leaving behind a world that was completely and fundamentally changed. A new society had to be built, literally from the ashes of the old one.
The scale of the death toll is just staggering. It's hard to even wrap your head around it. We think somewhere between a third and even up to a half of the entire population of Europe died. Entire family lines just gone. The demographic heart of the continent was just ripped out.
But this unbelievable loss had a totally unexpected side effect. With so many people gone, workers were suddenly rare. And if you're rare, you're valuable. For the first time, the surviving peasants actually had some power. They could demand more money, better treatment. And this massive economic shift started to crack the very foundations of the old feudal system.
And you can see this trauma everywhere in the culture of the time. Art became obsessed with death. A new theme called the Dance Macabre, or the Dance of Death, got really popular. It showed skeletons dancing away with everyone from popes and kings to regular folks. The message couldn't be clearer. In the end, death comes for us all. It's the one great equalizer.
Now, the Black Death did eventually fade away, but its shadow was incredibly long. And honestly, we can still hear its echo today.
I want you to just let this number sink in. It took Europe more than 150 years, a century and a half, just for its population to get back to where it was before the plague. That's how deep the wound was. We're talking about multiple generations being born and dying before the continent even began to recover.
But even in those truly dark times, humanity found a way to cope. The famous Italian author Boccaccio wrote a book called The Decameron. It's about a group of young people who escaped the plague by isolating in the countryside, and they passed the long, scary days by telling each other stories. It's this beautiful reminder that even when we're faced with the worst, we turn to connection and to storytelling to survive.
And really, that's what this all comes down to, right? This isn't just some dusty old history lesson. It's a mirror. It makes us ask ourselves some tough questions. When we face a global crisis, how do we fight back against fear and misinformation? How do we keep our societies from falling apart? The parallels to our own world are impossible to miss.
In the end, the story of the Black Death is really a story of two things. On the one hand, it's a tale of unimaginable horror, a stark reminder of just how fragile we are. But on the other hand, it is an incredible story of human resilience, of our ability to endure, to adapt, and to somehow, some way, build a new world from the ashes of the old one.